Tell me, where do you usually watch my videos? At home, work, or somewhere else?
My sister Jillian has always had a talent for timing, specifically for showing up at the exact moment that would ensure all eyes landed squarely on her, whether it was appropriate or not, whether it was helpful or hurtful, whether it was her place or someone else's. And if you ever called her out on it, she'd tilt her head slightly to the right, widen her eyes just enough to seem innocent but not dumb, and say something like, "What? I didn't know that would bother you," as if she hadn't been playing this game her entire life. So when she stood up at my engagement party, mid-toast, mind you, while my best friend was literally holding up a glass of champagne and saying something heartfelt about the 10 years Ryan and I had been together, I knew in the pit of my stomach that something was about to shift in that room, and not in my favor. She didn't clink a glass or clear her throat or ask for permission. She just stood up, smiled faintly, cradled her barely there stomach, and announced in a voice so sweet it could rot teeth. I wasn't sure when the right moment was, but surprise, I'm pregnant. Then she looked right at me, right through me, and smirked. And I swear to God, it wasn't just a sister's proud smile or a nervous gesture of excitement. It was sharp. It was calculated. It was a goddamn scalpel. There was a half-second of stunned silence, just long enough for me to feel my breath catch, before the room erupted into applause and laughter. My cousin Maddie screamed and hugged her. My aunt knocked over a wine glass in her rush to congratulate. Even my own mother clapped her hands together like she'd just seen a miracle. And all the while, I sat there, my hand frozen halfway to my mouth, gripping a fork that suddenly felt like a weapon I didn't know how to use. The worst part wasn't the announcement, although that was already a huge slap in the face. It was what she said after, right before she sat back down, when the attention was finally starting to shift back toward me and Ryan, and the server was attempting to salvage the original flow of the party. Jillian tossed her perfectly curled hair over one shoulder, looked around with faux humility, and said, "Oops, sorry, guess I stole the spotlight again." Like it was some funny inside joke. Like this hadn't been a years-long pattern of behavior. Like this wasn't yet another instance of her treating my life milestones like dress rehearsals for her own drama. And once again, they laughed. Not everyone, but enough people. Enough to make the laughter feel like a verdict. Ryan didn't laugh. He reached under the table, squeezed my knee, and gave me a look that said, "I see you, I see this, I'm with you." It grounded me for exactly 30 seconds. Then someone handed Jillian a virgin mimosa, and another round of cheers broke out. And I realized that if I didn't get up and walk to the bathroom right then, I'd say something I couldn't take back. I stood in front of the mirror in the women's room for longer than I care to admit, running cold water over my hands, trying to calm the sudden roaring chaos inside my chest. Because this wasn't just about the party. This was about every school award she casually overshadowed, every boyfriend who flirted with her just to see if they could, every family vacation where I ended up the photographer while she played the star. It was about the way people always forgave her chaos because she was just being Jillian, and the way I'd been taught, explicitly and repeatedly, that it was my job to rise above. Be the bigger person, don't make a scene, keep the peace. But as I stood there, staring at my own reflection, I felt something shift in me, not a scream or a meltdown, but something colder, something more focused. A very quiet decision. When I walked back to the table, I didn't sit down right away. I leaned into Ryan's ear and whispered something I'd never said before, not even in my darkest moments of frustration. "Are you ready to get a little dirty?" He looked at me, eyebrows raised, but didn't flinch. He nodded once, just once, and I knew in that moment that this was going to be different. That this time, I wasn't going to just move on and let her have it. This time, I wasn't going to smile through gritted teeth and pretend her performance didn't cut deep. That night, after everyone left and the house was quiet, I sat on the edge of the bed in my robe, scrolling through the dozens of photos taken during what should have been our moment, our celebration. And in nearly every single picture, someone's face was turned toward Jillian, even the ones of me and Ryan, even the cake cutting. She was there, in the background, holding her stomach and glowing like a damn lighthouse, pulling ships off course. I looked over at Ryan and said, "We're changing the wedding plans." He didn't ask why, he just said, "Tell me what you're thinking." And I told him. By the time the sun came up, we had already drafted the message. Short, elegant, unapologetically cryptic. It was going to change everything, but I wasn't sending it yet. I was going to wait. Just long enough for Jillian to post her curated pregnancy announcement with a wide-eyed "didn't mean to make it about me" caption. Just long enough for her to bask in her usual spotlight. Then I'd flip the switch, and when she read what we sent out, when she saw what it said, she wouldn't be laughing. Not this time. There's a difference between being the sibling who always wins and being the sibling who always needs to win. Jillian was never content with simply living her own life. No, she had to orbit mine just close enough to overshadow it, as if my joy was her compass, and her job was to steer the attention wherever she felt it belonged, which, in her world, was always directly on her. From the moment we were old enough to be compared, grades, haircuts, friends, prom dresses, it became clear to everyone around us that Jillian was the one who sparkled, while I was the one who endured, the steady one, the reliable one. The one who cleaned up after the emotional messes our parents refused to acknowledge out loud, but always expected someone to handle quietly. And that someone was me. That night, after the engagement party had crumbled into another humiliating chapter, in a long, exhausting saga of being second place at my own celebrations, I lay next to Ryan in bed, not even pretending to sleep, as my mind revisited the same reel of moments that had once stung and now burned. I remembered my college graduation when Jillian showed up 45 minutes late in a white maxi dress and flip-flops, drawing attention to her sunburn and loudly complaining about traffic. I remembered the dinner I'd planned to introduce my then-boyfriend to the family, only for her to burst in mid-toast with a bloody nose and an elaborate story about slipping while putting on eyeliner, which somehow derailed the entire evening and ended with me driving her to urgent care. I remembered the first time Ryan met my family, when Jillian asked, within minutes, if we thought about getting a prenup just in case, and everyone had laughed like she was some charming whirlwind instead of a consistent storm system that always seemed to arrive right when the skies were clearing. So when I whispered to Ryan that I wanted to get a little dirty, it wasn't just a moment of pettiness or a desire to retaliate. It was the first breath of a long-held scream, finally breaking free from the polite cage I'd built for myself. He didn't question it. He just asked how far I was willing to go. And the answer was, far enough that she wouldn't see it coming. We started small. Late that night, while the guests were still uploading Instagram stories of clinking glasses and blurry group shots, we sat in the kitchen drafting a new version of our save the date. We kept the branding tasteful, elegant gold script on a cream background. No dramatic changes to the aesthetic, nothing too jarring, but the text was stripped down to something almost poetic. Please reserve the afternoon of Sunday, June 4th. A celebration is coming sooner than you think. No mention of a wedding, no venue, no hints, just an invitation wrapped in mystery. And when people clicked the RSVP link, all they saw was a countdown timer and a message. More details to follow. This is a moment you won't want to miss. We sent it to everyone except Jillian, and let me tell you, she noticed. Within 6 hours of the emails going out, I had 3 missed calls from her, 1 from my mother, and 2 vague texts from our cousin Amber that said things like, "Everything okay?" and "Did I miss something?" But I said nothing. Ryan and I agreed to let the silence do the heavy lifting, because if there was one thing Jillian couldn't handle, it wasn't confrontation, it was exclusion. By the second day, she posted a photo of her ultrasound on Instagram with a caption that read, "We wanted to wait, but the moment just felt right. Baby M coming this December." I stared at the picture for a full minute, watching her try to capitalize on the momentum she'd stolen. The image was over-edited, the lighting artificial, the smile forced. She was trying to get ahead of something, but she didn't know what. And that made me smile for the first time in 2 days. The calls kept coming, My mother, my father, even our old neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, who hadn't spoken to me since I mowed my lawn in a sports bra 2 summers ago, left a voicemail saying, "I heard you're planning something. Sounds exciting." The thing was, no one knew what we were planning, and that was the point. Jillian was spiraling in a vacuum of uncertainty, and it was glorious to watch. On the 4th day, I finally answered the phone. "Erin," Jillian said, not even waiting for me to speak. "Why didn't I get an invite?" "Everyone else got one." "Maddie said something about June 4th. What's going on?" I let a pause hang in the air like wet laundry on a windless day. "We're just doing something different," I said evenly. "You'll hear more soon." "Different how?" she pushed, her voice rising, and there it was. That unmistakable crack in her tone, that strain of not being in control. "Is this, what, a second engagement party? A wedding? Are you moving it up? Why wouldn't you tell me?" I could hear her pacing through her house, probably barefoot, probably phone pressed against her cheek while her free hand gestured wildly in front of no one, probably already calculating how to spin whatever this was into a narrative where she was the victim, the shocked sister, the innocent bystander to my sudden cruelty. "It's just something we wanted to keep small," I said, focused, no distractions. "Distractions," she snapped. "Are you calling my baby a distraction?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence was louder than anything I could have said. She hung up. Or maybe I did. Honestly, I was too calm to remember. Ryan and I looked at each other and laughed. Not because it was funny, but because we knew something had shifted. Permanently. We weren't playing defense anymore. We had the ball now. What came next would change everything. Not just for the wedding, but for the entire balance of our family. And Jillian, for once, would be watching from the sidelines. But I wasn't done. Not even close. There's a particular kind of silence that falls over a group of people when they're waiting for someone else to explain something that doesn't quite make sense. A silence heavy with anticipation, where even the clinking of coffee cups feels invasive, and all eyes dart between each other, hoping someone else will ask the question they're too polite or too wary to voice out loud. That was the exact atmosphere in the garden room of Café Amelie, where Ryan and I had invited 24 of our closest friends and family for what we carefully labeled as a pre-wedding reflection brunch, a term vague enough to stir curiosity, but formal enough to prevent anyone from bailing without feeling rude. It was early June, the air was thick with honeysuckle, and the guests had shown up in sundresses, sport coats, and expressions that ranged from politely intrigued to outright suspicious. Of course, Jillian was not among them. That had been a deliberate decision, not out of malice, at least not entirely, but out of self-preservation, because I had finally accepted that no matter how beautiful the room or how carefully curated the moment, her presence came with a price, one I was no longer willing to pay. We had planned this brunch with surgical precision, invitations sent just under the radar, logistics coordinated privately, and a clear plan for the reveal that we rehearsed more than once. For once, this moment was going to be ours. I stood beside Ryan as he tapped his spoon against a glass, not too loudly, just enough to cut through the polite chatter. And when he looked at me, giving the smallest of nods, I took a breath that felt like it had been waiting years to be exhaled. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady but unmistakably charged with something deeper, something closer to resolve than joy. "We know the invitation was a bit mysterious, and we appreciate you taking time out of your lives to be here without knowing exactly why." There were a few scattered chuckles, a few murmurs, the kind people make when they know something is about to happen but can't yet determine whether it's good or bad. I smiled, genuinely this time, not out of performance, but out of quiet triumph, and continued. "When Ryan and I got engaged," I said, my hand brushing his, "we started planning a wedding the way people usually do, picking venues, sending out save the dates, arguing about flower arrangements. But somewhere along the way, we realized that what we were planning wasn't actually ours. It was a production, one that felt like it belonged more to everyone else than to us, so we changed course." I could feel the tension in the room begin to rise, not in an aggressive way, but in that collective inhale people do when a secret is about to be cracked open. My mother leaned forward, brows drawn together. My father cleared his throat. Amber, ever the instigator, took out her phone under the table and started recording, subtle as a hurricane. "We've decided," Ryan said, picking up seamlessly, "to elope in Tuscany next week." The silence that followed was absolute. No applause, no gasps. Just the stunned stillness of people processing something that fundamentally rewrites what they thought they knew. I watched their expressions shift like weather patterns. Confusion, curiosity, then for some, visible disappointment. And beneath it all, I could sense the same question building in all of them, while Ryan continued, "It's not about secrecy, and it's not about drama. It's about making a decision that reflects who we are and what we value. Privacy, peace, and the freedom to start our marriage on our own terms." What he didn't say, and what I wouldn't either, not yet, was that this was also about protection. About reclaiming a moment that had nearly been stolen before it began. It was about rewriting the script that had cast me as the reliable supporting character and placing myself, unapologetically, in the lead. After a beat, the questions began. My cousin Olivia asked about the logistics. My aunt wanted to know what kind of dress I'd be wearing. My mother asked, her voice tight, "And why wasn't Jillian invited to this brunch?" I looked her in the eye, and for once I didn't flinch. "Because this wasn't about her," I said simply. The words hung there, heavier than I intended, but I didn't take them back. Not this time. When the brunch wrapped up, people filtered out slowly, lingering longer than usual, as if reluctant to return to the regular world, where they weren't part of something secret and dramatic. Some hugged me tighter than usual. Some avoided my gaze, and one by one, they left, until only Ryan and I remained. Alone with the crumbs of pastries and the faint buzz of what we had just set in motion. That evening, Jillian finally received her version of the invite. A text, not an email, because I wanted her to know she wasn't included by accident, but by design. The message was short. "Since we couldn't include you earlier, just wanted to let you know we're getting married in Italy next week. It'll be small. Safe travels if you're already planning to crash." She didn't reply for 20 minutes. Then at precisely 9:13 p.m., my phone rang. I didn't answer. The voicemail was less a message and more a performance. A crescendo of disbelief, accusation, and self-pity. That culminated in her screaming, actually screaming, that I had ruined the family, ruined her pregnancy, and ruined her trust in me forever. And at the end of it, when she finally paused for breath, her voice cracked, and she asked, "Why would you do this to me?" I sat there listening to it. Not once, not twice, but 3 times, because there was something about hearing her say those words that finally made it clear. It had never been about sharing joy or supporting each other. It had always been about positioning herself as the center of every emotional orbit. And now, for the first time, she was spinning alone. Ryan walked in, handed me a glass of wine, and asked what she said. I just smiled and said, "She's confused." He raised an eyebrow. "And how do you feel?" I looked out the window at the summer dusk settling over the lawn and said, "Lighter." Because that's the thing about boundaries. They don't always feel brave or dramatic. Sometimes they just feel like relief. But Jillian wasn't done, not even close. In the weeks that followed our announcement, the elopement in Tuscany, the brunch revelation, the cryptic save the date that had stirred more gossip than any actual wedding ceremony likely would have, something changed in the air around me, as if by cutting Jillian out, I had removed a heavy piece of emotional furniture from the middle of every room I walked into. And suddenly there was space to breathe, to stretch, to move without bumping into the sharp corners of resentment I had gotten far too used to navigating around in silence. And yet the absence of her didn't go unnoticed, especially not by those who had always seen our dynamic as harmless sibling rivalry, instead of the slow erosion it really was. An erosion of trust, of self-worth, of the belief that maybe, just maybe, I was allowed to have something of my own. without having to fight for it tooth and nail. The decision not to invite her to the wedding wasn't something I made lightly. It wasn't made in the heat of her pregnancy announcement or even in the silence that followed her voicemail tantrum. It was made in the quiet moments in between, in the stillness of dawn spent walking the vineyard paths behind our rental villa, in the long pauses during meals when Ryan and I would sit with glasses of local wine and say nothing, both silently unlearning the noise that had filled our lives for far too long. It was in those moments, when the absence of chaos felt almost foreign, that I realized just how conditioned I had been to expect it, and just how badly I needed to unlearn that expectation before beginning a life with someone who deserved better than a woman, always waiting for a sister to hijack her peace. We had invited only a handful of people: my best friend Lena, Ryan's brother, and his wife, a former professor of mine who now lived in Rome and had become more family to me than most of my blood relatives. The ceremony itself was small, almost surreal in its simplicity. White chairs in a crooked line under an olive tree, soft music from a local cellist, and a view that stretched out over rolling hills and a sky so clear it felt like the universe had finally, mercifully, stepped aside to let us have this. I wore a dress I'd found in a boutique in Florence. No label, no sparkle, just fabric that clung where it should and let go where it needed to. Ryan looked at me like I was something sacred, and for the first time in a long time, I believed him. During the vows, he said, "You are the first silence I've ever trusted," and I don't know if anyone else fully understood what he meant, but I did. Because silence with Jillian had always been dangerous, a space she filled with implication and manipulation, a pause she weaponized by rushing to speak first, by controlling the narrative before anyone else could breathe. But with Ryan, silence was safety. It was space. It was the absence of judgment and the presence of understanding. It was everything Jillian had never allowed me to have. But peace, I've learned, is never permanent when people like Jillian are left out of a story they think they should own. The night after the wedding, after the laughter and the wine and the music had finally faded into a stillness so pure, I could barely believe it was mine, I got a message from Lana. No subject line, no warning, just a link to Instagram and the words, "You're going to want to see this." I clicked it, already knowing what I'd find, already bracing for impact. Jillian had posted a carousel of photos, some from our childhood, some from more recent years, all carefully selected to frame her as the loving, supportive sister who had been cruelly excluded. The caption was a masterpiece of passive aggression, opening with, "Some wounds never really heal, especially when they come from the people you love most." I guess I wasn't good enough to make the guest list. She went on to reference her pregnancy, the stress it had caused her, and her hope that forgiveness would come one day, even if an invitation never would. And beneath that was a flood of comments: sympathy, outrage, confusion, some attacking me directly, some praising her courage, some asking what had happened, others assuming they already knew. I stared at it, not angry but stunned, not by the fact that she had posted it, because of course she had, but by how effective it was. She didn't need to lie directly, she just curated the narrative, framed the pictures, chose the words with just enough ambiguity to make herself look like the heartbroken sister, and me like the ice queen. She didn't need revenge, she just needed a platform. Ryan came into the room while I was still staring at the screen and asked if I was okay. I turned the phone toward him without a word and watched as he scrolled, jaw tightening. "What are you going to do?" he asked. And I thought about it, really thought about it. I thought about responding, about correcting the record, about dragging up the years of manipulation and sabotage and twisted dynamics that had led me here. I thought about posting my own photos, my own stories, proving how carefully she'd edited the truth to suit her purposes. But then I thought about what Ryan had said, about trusting the silence, about not letting her noise define my narrative anymore. So I posted something else, a short video, nothing flashy, just me, sitting on a sun-warmed stone wall, overlooking the hills, reading an old diary entry from when I was 15. My voice, calm. The words, raw. I spoke of being the girl who stepped aside so others could feel taller, of learning to dim herself, so others could shine without discomfort. I read about a birthday where Jillian stole the gift I had saved for, lied about it, and somehow ended up with both the gift and an apology from me. I didn't name her. I didn't have to. The comments filled in the blanks. At the end of the video, I looked into the camera and said, "Sometimes choosing peace looks like walking away, and sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you can do." I didn't check her reaction. I didn't need to, because by then, I understood the difference between revenge and release. And while she was busy building a version of events where she was the wounded party, I was standing in the truth of mine. But I knew Jillian. I knew her better than she knew herself. And I knew this wasn't the end, not by a long shot. There are moments in life when closure doesn't arrive like a comforting whisper or a well-timed apology, but rather as an unexpected bang, a shift in the air, a final crack in the dam. You've been reinforcing for years with polite smiles, buried hurt, and second chances offered to people who never truly deserved them in the first place. And though I had told myself again and again that Jillian's Instagram stunt, that curated carousel of sisterhood rewritten through the lens of martyrdom, was her last act, a final flailing attempt to recenter herself in a narrative she was no longer welcome in, I should have known that someone like Jillian doesn't exit quietly, doesn't fade gently into the background once they've been denied the spotlight they've come to believe is their birthright. The fallout from her post was, predictably, swift and exhausting. My inbox filled with a mix of messages, some from friends trying to be diplomatic, gently asking if there was more to the story, others from distant relatives expressing thinly veiled judgment, as though my refusal to include my sister in one moment of my life outweighed 2 decades of her undermining mine. But what struck me more than the content of the messages was their frequency, the way they kept arriving like waves against a shore that was slowly eroding beneath my feet, trying to pull me back into a sea I had fought so hard to swim away from. I didn't respond to any of them, not out of spite, but because I knew deep down that no explanation would ever be enough for the people who were already determined to misunderstand me. And then came the letter. It arrived not by email, not as a text, but as an actual piece of paper, folded, handwritten, stuffed into an envelope addressed in Jillian's dramatic cursive. No stamp, no return address, just my name, underlined twice, as if that alone demanded my attention. Inside, she wrote the way she always spoke when she was trying to win, the way she had cried in high school when caught cheating on a test, the way she had begged our parents for forgiveness after crashing my car, and somehow convincing them I hadn't told her the brakes were sensitive. She started with an apology, but it was the kind of apology that asked for absolution without offering accountability. She said she was sorry for how things turned out, not for what she did. She said she missed me, that pregnancy had made her emotional, that maybe she hadn't been thinking clearly, and then, just when I thought she might finally be sincere, she included a paragraph about how our family was confused and hurt by my decision to exclude them, and how she was just trying to rebuild what I tore down. And that's when I knew. She hadn't written that letter for me. She had written it for herself, to sleep better, to feel like the bigger person, to parade around the idea that she'd made the first move, while painting me as the stubborn one clinging to anger. But what she didn't know, what she still couldn't seem to comprehend, was that I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. And when you're done, truly done, you don't fight, you don't plead, you don't explain. You just walk away and let the silence speak louder than the noise ever could. Still, I needed one last thing. Not for her, but for me. One final act of clarity, of reclamation, of truth. So I wrote a piece, not a diary entry this time, not a vague video, but a short, raw essay titled, "My Sister Always Stole the Spotlight," until I stopped building her stage. I didn't name her. I didn't mention the wedding, the pregnancy, or the party. I simply wrote about growing up in someone's shadow and realizing one day that the shadow only existed because I had been standing too close, too long, I published it anonymously on a platform known for personal essays, and within days it started to gain traction. Not viral, not explosive, but enough to be seen, to be heard by people who recognized themselves in it. People who commented things like, "This is my life word for word," or "I never realized until now how much I've dimmed myself." And that was enough. That was all I needed. Because in the end, revenge didn't look like payback or public humiliation. It looked like peace. It looked like finally sleeping through the night without bracing for the next crisis she'd manufacture. It looked like waking up beside someone who loved me for who I was, not who I had to pretend to be in order to keep the family from fracturing. It looked like standing under the Tuscan sun, hand in hand with Ryan, watching the world move forward without the weight of someone else's insecurities dragging us backward. And yet, even in that peace, I left room for the unresolved. Because that's the thing about stories like this. They don't tie up neatly with bows and hugs and Christmas card reconciliations. Sometimes the sister doesn't change. Sometimes the hurt doesn't go away. Sometimes the ending isn't a reunion, but a quiet goodbye whispered to a version of family that never really saw you. I don't know what Jillian tells people now. Maybe she says we drifted. Maybe she says I was jealous or cold, or that motherhood changed her and I couldn't understand. Maybe she says nothing at all, but I do know this. The next time someone asks me why we're not close, I won't hesitate. I'll say, without bitterness and without shame, because I stopped playing a part in a show I didn't audition for. And that, more than any speech or Instagram post, is how I finished it.